The automatic doors of Bay 3 hadn't finished swinging when Dr. Warren Fisk turned from the trauma gurney, pointed across the room, and made the worst professional decision of his career. "Pack your things, Brennan. You're finished." He expected tears. He'd reduced good nurses to silence before with a single sentence, and the silence always felt like confirmation that he'd been right to do it. What he did not expect was that 64 minutes later, a column of black government vehicles would seal every entrance to Houston Regional Medical Center, while a 2-star Army general in full dress uniform walked through the sliding glass doors asking for her by name. To the administration at Houston Regional, Callie Brennan was a higher code and a direct deposit. To the overnight residents, she was just Brennan, the ER nurse, who materialized beside a bed before they'd finished their assessment, who never asked twice for equipment because it was already in her hand, who wore long-sleeve compression layers under her scrubs in the dead of a Houston August, and never offered a word of explanation. She ate lunch alone. She drove home before dawn with her badge, lanyard turned face in. She didn't come to the resident happy hours. She didn't come to the department holiday party. She existed at Houston Regional the way water exists in certain pipes, essential, invisible, noticed only when it stopped flowing. But inside Trauma Bay 1, Callie was something else. She had a stillness that unsettled people who didn't know where it came from. Alarms didn't change her face. The sound of a crash cart coming fast down a corridor registered in her eyes and nowhere else. She could carry on a conversation at normal volume while placing a large bore IV into a collapsing vein in the dark, and her hands never shook. The first-year residents assumed she was cold. The attending physicians, who actually paid attention, understood that she wasn't cold at all. She had simply been somewhere worse than this. And nothing about this room frightened her. Dr. Fisk had been chief of emergency medicine at Houston Regional for 11 years. He was 51, Harvard-trained, and had built his career on the particular kind of institutional confidence that comes from years of working with people who never pushed back. He wasn't a poor physician in any technical sense. He understood the science. He knew the algorithms. But he was the kind of man who believed that correctness was his by default, and that anyone who suggested otherwise was a problem requiring management. He had a corner office, a photograph in the lobby, and a donor wall that bore his family name. He gave lectures at regional conferences about collaborative care, and returned to his department and spoke to the nursing staff the way a pianist speaks to the keys, as objects that existed to produce the sound he intended. For the 3 months Callie had been at Houston Regional, she and Fisk had maintained a kind of unspoken arrangement. He ignored her, she let him. But the residents had started to notice something. When Fisk passed over a finding, there was always a quiet voice from the supply side of the bay suggesting a second look. When a medication dose didn't add up, the pharmacy received a call that couldn't be traced to anyone. When a patient's pressure trended wrong in a way that didn't fit the working diagnosis, the correct intervention would appear on the secondary chart, initiated with quiet precision before the attending had turned around. Fisk noticed it too. He didn't know what to call it, so he called it overstepping. "You're a nurse," he'd said 2 weeks prior, dropping her documentation on the triage counter without looking at her. "You observe. You document what I tell you to document. You don't suggest differentials. You don't redirect my team. You don't practice medicine without a license." He had picked up a styrofoam cup, decided it was empty, and crushed it with one hand. One more incident and we'll be having a very different conversation. Callie had looked at him for a moment. Understood, Doctor. She had turned back to her station. If Fisk had been paying attention, which he was not, he might have registered the way she rolled her left shoulder slightly as she moved, the small accommodation for an old injury that had never fully healed. He might have caught the line of scar tissue that disappeared beneath her collar. He might have recognized the specific quality of her calm. Not the patience of someone had learned to tolerate difficult bosses, but the operational steadiness of someone who had made life or death decisions in places where hesitation was its own kind of failure. Before Houston, before the ER, before the bare apartment she had moved into with 2 bags and no furniture and no particular plans beyond sleeping without nightmares, Callie Brennan had spent 5 years as a flight medic attached to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. She had worked rotations out of forward operating bases in northern Iraq and eastern Syria, flying extraction missions into landing zones that were still taking fire, working on the floor of a Black Hawk helicopter with the aircraft banking, hard to break the tracer line while a man bled through her hands, and the crew chief told her to hold on. She had performed needle decompression by feel in the dark. She had improvised with whatever the aircraft carried, when whatever the aircraft carried wasn't enough. She had made decisions in the span of seconds that doctors with twice her training would have needed a consult to make. The operating rooms at Houston Regional, the overhead lights, the sterilized trays, the monitors, the stillness, were so far removed from those helicopters that she sometimes had to consciously remind herself it was the same profession. She had separated from the Army 14 months ago. The DD-214 said honorable discharge. The truth was more complicated. There had been a night outside Al-Tanf, a night that came back sometimes in the small hours, sometimes in the middle of a routine blood draw, and afterward, Callie had understood that she was done with the version of herself that had to be a weapon. She wanted to be useful. She wanted to do it quietly. She took the ER job because it was available, and because she was overqualified, and because being overqualified meant the work would not catch her off guard. Fate, it turned out, had a different read on the situation. Tropical Storm Dolores made landfall east of Galveston on a Thursday morning in September. Having intensified overnight from a depression into a Category 2 that stripped highway signs from their poles and turned 3 coastal counties into inland lakes. The evacuation orders had gone out at 4 in the morning. By 9, Interstate 10 was a parking lot of idling cars and pickup trucks loaded with dogs and photo albums. By 10, there were accidents stacking from Baytown to Katy, and Houston Regional's emergency management coordinator was on the radio activating the mass casualty protocol. The next 90 minutes were what Callie was built for, even if she would never have said it that way. Fractured limbs, head trauma, 2 cardiac events, a pediatric patient with a femur fracture who screamed until Callie sat with her and talked about nothing in particular in a steady voice until the girl stopped screaming. She triaged and pushed medications and coordinated the secondary surveys and watched the board fill up with names while the rain hammered the windows, and the radio gave increasingly grim updates about the storm track. At 11:47, they brought in Nathan. He was 26, physically fit, wearing the remnants of a gray t-shirt that the paramedics had cut off him during extrication. He had been on a charter bus carrying Storm evacuees north when the driver lost control on the rain-slicked ramp to Highway 90, and the bus rolled onto its passenger side. Nathan had been at the window. The extrication had taken 23 minutes. The paramedic handoff was fast, because Unit 12 was already 2 minutes out with another critical. GCS 12 on arrival and trending downward, BP 86 over 58. 2 large bore IVs running wide open, C-collar backboard O2 mask at 15 liters. The medic noted that Nathan had been talking at the scene and then stopped. Fisk took the case. He always took the high visibility ones. Blunt abdominal trauma with hypotension, he said, snapping fresh gloves. Splenic lac until proven otherwise. Type and cross massive transfusion protocol. Get me a fast and call the surgical team. He moved with the confidence of a man who found his own assessments self-concerning. And let's get imaging. Pan CT. Callie was on Nathan's left side, running the second set of vitals, when she noticed it. She looked at his neck, then at his chest, then at the SAT monitor, then back at his neck. Doctor, she kept her voice level. Tracheal deviation right. Breath sounds absent on the left. I've assessed him. They were present on the rig. They're absent now. If this is a tension pneumo, imaging. I said I've assessed him, Brennan. The emphasis on her name was a warning. He's hypotensive from hemorrhage. The abdomen is the source. We go by the mechanism. His SAT is at 89 and dropping. Absent breath sounds with tracheal deviation is tension pneumothorax until. I know what tension pneumothorax is. He turned from the gurney to face her directly, and his voice dropped to the register he reserved for making a point in front of an audience. I also know what a scrub nurse overstepping her scope of practice looks like. You document. You run the medications I order. If I want a differential, I have a resident. He turned back. Get me that imaging order. The SAT alarm changed its tone. 86. The color around Nathan's lips was wrong. The blue-gray of oxygen not arriving where it needed to go. Callie looked at Nathan's face. He was someone's son. Somewhere in the city, in the storm, someone was pulling their phone out every 30 seconds waiting for a call. She pulled the 14-gauge angio catheter from the supply cart without asking permission. She snapped on a clean pair of gloves. She found the landmark at Nathan's left chest with 2 fingers. Second intercostal space, midclavicular line, and she inserted the needle cleanly, without hesitation, the way she had done it in the back of a helicopter over the Syrian desert, with the airframe shaking, and someone else bleeding on the other side of the aircraft. The rush of air was immediate and audible. The SAT monitor began to climb, 89, 92, 95. Nathan's color came back slowly, like light returning to a room. 4 seconds of silence followed. In those 4 seconds, every person in Bay 3, the resident, the tech, the circulating nurse, the anesthesiologist watching from the equipment station, made the same calculation and arrived at the same answer. Then Fisk's face changed. Get out of my bay. His voice was unsteady in a way it almost never was. Get out of this department. You are terminated. What you just did is a criminal act, and I will have you arrested. I will have your license pulled. I will make sure you never work in medicine in this state again. Callie looked at Nathan's monitor one more time, watched the numbers hold. He'll need a chest tube, she said. Left side. Don't let shift change delay it. She stripped her gloves. She walked out. A chief of emergency medicine fired a quiet ear nurse mid-resuscitation because she performed an intervention he had refused to order. He assumed that was the end of it. He was still inside that assumption, when a column of government vehicles came to a stop outside his hospital, and a two-star Army general walked through the lobby doors, looking for the woman he had just thrown out of his department. In the staff locker room on the second floor, Callie worked through her locker with the same economy she brought to everything. Extra compression sleeves, a small photograph, a travel-sized hand lotion she had bought at a gas station 6 weeks ago and still hadn't opened. She packed them into her backpack the way she packed everything. Methodically, without wasted motion. She sat on the bench and listened to the building hum around her, and felt the particular hollow exhaustion that comes after the adrenaline has finished burning. She had saved the kid's life. That was real. Whatever Fisk filed with the nursing board was paperwork, and paperwork, in her experience, was survivable. She put on her jacket, long-sleeved, dark green, the kind that covered the scar that ran along her left forearm. She zipped the backpack and set it on her knees and sat with her eyes closed for a moment, not sleeping, just resting the way you learn to rest when sleep is something that arrives in fragments. Upstairs, Dr. Fisk was dictating a termination letter and preparing a complaint to the Texas Board of Nursing. The hospital's administrator on duty, a careful man named Howard Steed, was listening and nodding with the practiced attention of someone who understood that the chief of emergency medicine was a name on the building and behaved accordingly. They were too absorbed in managing the situation to notice that the ambulance bay camera feed had gone strange. The rumble reached the lobby before the vehicles were visible. 3 black SUVs moving in close formation around the hospital's vehicle loop, followed by a dark blue government sedan with federal plates. The security guard on the door went out to redirect them. He made it to the threshold. The SUV doors opened in sequence. 6 soldiers in Army service uniforms stepped out and moved to the entrance with the unhurried precision of people who did not expect redirection. They weren't aggressive. They didn't need to be. They simply placed themselves at the entry points with the calm certainty that is its own kind of authority, and the lobby, crowded with storm evacuees and family members on phones, went very quiet. The sedan door opened. The man who stepped out was compact, gray at the temples, with the kind of posture that is not imposed by occasion, but simply lives in a person's spine. His chest carried service ribbons arranged in the specific order that told a story to anyone who knew how to read it. He walked into Houston Regional Medical Center, the way men walk into rooms when the outcome has already been determined. His name was Conrad Ray. He commanded the 1st Cavalry Division at Fort Hood. He had driven 4 hours through the outer bands of Dolores because his son had been on a bus that rolled on a highway ramp that morning, and because 18 minutes ago his chief of staff had answered a call from someone inside this hospital. He stopped at the reception desk. "I'm looking for a nurse," he said. "Callie Brennan." Howard Steed appeared from the administrative corridor, moving at the fast walk that preserves the appearance of composure. Fisk was behind him. Fisk had reassembled himself in the elevator. The deliberate voice, the confident posture, the physician face that said he was the most qualified person in any room he entered. He extended his hand. "General Ray. Warren Fisk, Chief of Emergency Medicine. I want you to know that Nathan is stable. What we were dealing with was an extremely complex presentation. Tension pneumothorax, layered over blunt thoracic trauma, hemodynamically unstable on arrival. I recognized the trajectory early and made the call to intervene directly. Your son is being prepared for definitive chest tube placement right now, and his prognosis is excellent." Ray looked at the extended hand. He did not take it. "I spoke to the anesthesiologist," Ray said. Fisk's hand lowered. "She called my chief of staff's personal number 21 minutes ago." Ray reached into his jacket and produced his phone, though he didn't look at it. He kept his eyes on Fisk's face. "She told him that my son's oxygen saturation dropped to 86% while you were ordering imaging. She told him a nurse identified a tension pneumothorax over your objection and performed a needle decompression that saved his life. She also told him you fired that nurse in front of the department immediately after." He put the phone away. "I want to know where Brennan is." The lobby was quiet enough to hear the rain. Steed turned to Fisk with an expression that had ceased to be neutral. "The nurse operated outside the boundaries of her licensure," Fisk said. His voice had developed a slight unevenness at the edges. "In Texas, a registered nurse cannot perform an invasive procedure without a physician's order. What she did was not only insubordinate, it was potentially actionable. Where is she?" Steed said quietly, "Second floor, staff room." The procession moved through the corridors. Ray, his two aides, the soldiers, Steed, and Fisk, who was beginning to understand that the architecture of the next several minutes was not going to be arranged around him. They found Callie sitting on the bench in front of her locker with her backpack on her knees. She had her eyes closed. She opened them when she heard the door. She saw the uniforms first, the ribbons, the branch insignia. Something in her went quiet in a very specific way that had nothing to do with the hospital around her. Then she saw his face. General Ray, her voice was barely above a murmur. Conrad Ray stepped into the staff room and looked at her for a moment. The backpack on her knees, the jacket covering her arms. The particular kind of tiredness that he recognized because he had seen it in people coming off long deployments. He looked at the scar that showed above the jacket's collar. His jaw tightened slightly. "I'm told you took care of my son," he said. "I did what the situation required, sir." From the doorway, Fisk tried once more. "General, I want to be very clear that what this nurse did constitutes a deviation from standard of care, and I intend to." Ray turned his head a fraction of an inch. The two soldiers in the doorway shifted position almost imperceptibly, and Fisk stopped speaking the way a radio stops when someone cuts the signal. Ray walked to the center of the room. He stopped in front of Callie. He squared his shoulders, and he brought his right hand to his brow in a salute that was measured and complete and absolute. "Sergeant Brennan." The rank landed somewhere in Callie's chest. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 14 months. She rose from the bench, the backpack sliding to the seat behind her, and returned the salute the way she had been trained. Clean, correct, neither rushed nor dramatic. "At ease, sir." He lowered his hand. Behind him, in the doorway, Fisk stood very still. Steed had stopped breathing. "My intelligence people took 6 weeks to find you," Ray said. "After you separated, you dropped off every system we had. Changed your contact information. Took a civilian job under your legal name, which apparently our people weren't expecting." He glanced at the gray lockers, the bulletin board, the institutional fluorescent light. "I understand wanting something different. I just wanted it quiet for a while, sir." He nodded. He reached back, and one of his aides stepped forward with a flat case. Dark leather, worn at the corners with the particular wear of something that has traveled. "You remember Sergeant First Class Diarra?" Something moved through Callie's face. "Yes, sir." He's my senior aide, has been for 2 years. Ray's voice was steady, but the steadiness was something he was managing with care. He told me 3 years ago that the reason he came home with both his hands able to sit at a desk and do that job was because a flight medic didn't leave him in a field outside Altanf when the bird took fire and the rest of the extraction was pulling for the door. He told me her name. I wrote it down. He opened the case. On a field of dark blue velvet rested a medal, the Army Commendation Medal with the Valor device, the small bronze V that meant the citation involved direct enemy fire. Fisk made a sound, not a word, just a sound, the particular noise a mind makes when it encounters information it cannot yet organize. This was approved 15 months ago, Ray said. You separated before the ceremony. It sat in my headquarters. I brought it because you should have had it a year ago. And because Sergeant Diarra is family. And because the woman who kept him alive is sitting in a hospital staff room about to be escorted out of the building for saving my son's life. He lifted the medal from the case. I am not only here as a father today, Sergeant. I'm here because some debts don't expire. He stepped forward and draped the ribbon around her neck. Callie looked down at it. Her jaw worked once. She pressed her lips together and nodded. Thank you, sir. Ray turned. He looked at Dr. Fisk for a measured moment, the look of a man deciding precisely how much of himself this situation is worth. I've commanded long enough to know the difference, he said, between someone who acts and someone who tells the story afterward. He looked at Steed. I'll leave the administrative decision to you, but I'll say this. We run a forward surgical training program at Hood, and we're always looking for instructors who know what controlled chaos looks like from the inside. He looked back at Callie. Whenever you're done being quiet, Sergeant, there's a slot with your name on it. Callie picked up her backpack. She looked at Fisk. At the man who had stood over a patient whose oxygen was dropping and called her response a crime. And she felt, with an unexpected clarity, that she had nothing left to say to him that hadn't already been said by a monitor climbing from 86 back to 95, by the sound of air releasing from where it had been trapped, by a 26-year-old man breathing on his own in the ICU upstairs, while his father stood in a locker room and saluted the nurse who had walked out of this building an hour ago, carrying her things in a backpack. Dr. Fisk, her voice was even, almost gentle. Don't delay the chest tube waiting for the surgical attending to scrub in. The resident can place it. You know that. She shouldered her bag. She walked out past the soldiers, past Steed, past the man who had spent 11 years building a professional world where no one corrected him, and who had spent this afternoon finding out what that world was actually made of. She walked down the stairs and through the lobby and out, through the sliding glass doors into the hospital parking lot, where the tail end of Dolores was still coming down but softer now, the worst of it having moved north. The air smelled like wet concrete and something cleaner underneath. She sat in her car and let the quiet settle. Her phone buzzed against her leg. Fort Hood area code. She looked at the screen for a moment, then set the phone face up on the passenger seat and watched the rain work its way down the windshield. She'd call back. She just needed a minute first. The ones who actually carry something never announce it. They show up in ordinary places and do the necessary thing. And when it's over, they don't wait around for the room to understand what it just witnessed. They pick up their bags. They walk out into whatever weather is waiting. They breathe.